My name is Josh Diggs, and I am the worship pastor at The Journey in St. Louis. When a church planner is thinking about hiring a worship guy, worship pastor, worship director, I think there are a lot of things to consider. And I think that worship leaders typically fall into certain roles. You have the guys who are the lead worshipers, and they kind of sometimes fall into their own experience with God, and so it's just them and God, and then sometimes they leave people out of that. I think that sometimes you have guys who are great pastors and they lead people very well, but artistically people just sort of cringe through their music. You have guys who want to be worship stars, they want to be the next Chris Tomlin, and then a fourth kind of character that we talk about sometimes is the guy who is the aloof artist, and he just kind of makes his music and doesn't really engage people. And so those there are some of the people that I wouldn't look for, but who most worship leaders typically are. And so I think that it's important to look for somebody who's humble and teachable, because if you're a church planner and you're the lead pastor, you really are the worship pastor of your church, and you are leading your church with the vision and leading through the teaching and preaching of the word. And so that is guiding a lot of other things, including how you plan worship services and the music and the liturgy and things like that. And so I think you need somebody who's humble and teachable, and wants to serve, doesn't want to just be a worship star, doesn't want to just do their art and expect that to connect people to God. I think you want somebody who's a leader first, maybe, and an artist second. We talk about the worship leader as the artist-leader hybrid, and that the artist describes what kind of leader they are. There have been plenty of lead artists throughout time, and people have followed their messages. John Lennon, for example, all you need is love, and people have followed that message, but they weren't following him. He wasn't a conscientious, intentional leader. And so I think you need somebody who is an intentional, conscientious leader. They're thinking about what they're doing, and they're planning, and they're planning carefully and thoroughly. I think you need somebody who's not afraid to engage people in relationship off the stage or on the stage. And quite often artists are sort of those aloof people, and they don't want to get in relationships. They're kind of socially awkward, can be. I was when I started out. And so I think it's important to look for somebody who at least has seeds of that. I think that all these things that you can push on and you can grow. Obviously, you want somebody who's competent and talented artistically, because if people are cringing through the music that they play, it's hard to get anything done. But I think, let's see. Yeah, finally, I think somebody who loves the gospel and loves Jesus genuinely, because that comes through on stage and you can't fake it. And people know, especially people who aren't Christians, when they come in, they can tell that dude on stage is in it for himself. And having no concept of the gospel or who Jesus is, they can tell that, and we've heard that a lot. And so I think that sounds obvious. You want a guy or gal who authentically loves Jesus, but there's a lot of other things that go around that, and somebody who's a gospel-centered worship leader, and that they're holding on to that thing, and everything else is up for grabs. And so they're willing to bend and be taught and be pushed on things like culture and things about how they lead and things like that. But if that gospel is central to what they're doing, I think that's a great start. The role of a worship pastor definitely depends on context. For example, the Journey's a multi-site church, and we use video, and so I can't be every place at once. I can't play at every venue on Sunday. And so one important thing for us is that I needed to be a worship pastor who would develop other leaders. I needed to be a worship pastor who would share the stage. And so that's been an essential part of pastoring and leading the worship vision at the Journey in St. Louis. I think a worship pastor has to love people and want to see them grow in their faith and mature in their walk with God, and how they're living out the gospel day to day. It's easy to get on stage and do what you do, and then walk off stage and just kind of, at best, hope that made an impact. But I think that a worship pastor needs to be a pastor, not just a music guy, not just a song leader, not just a band leader, but a pastor of people, someone who shepherds and cares for people. I think a worship pastor, oftentimes, they need to be able to teach, obviously, and a supplemental teacher in that they can cast vision about what worship's about. A lot of times, preachers aren't preaching on worship and what that's about, and so in our context, we do that, but I'm thinking about other ways about how are we going to push out this vision and this DNA and teach people about what our context is and why we do the things that we do. And so sometimes that means teaching forums, sometimes it means leading groups where people can ask questions, sometimes it means writing blogs, but I think your worship pastor has to be they have to champion that value of worship in your church and represent that well, both relationally in kind of like a prophet role, and then and then also in a priestly sense in how they shepherd and relate with people. And then finally, depending on your context, we have 4 campuses. We've got a lot to manage, and I think that it's often very hard for artists to be organized and to keep things on a pace and let people be involved in their artistic work while it's in process. But I think a worship pastor needs to be somebody who can be organized, set up systems. If you're in any size church, really, part of how you love people is that you organize things and you communicate clearly, and you do that in a way that shows them respect of their time, their energy, and their talents. And so I think it's essential for a worship pastor to stay organized, because you're working with so many volunteers usually, and you have to honor and respect them through how you keep things structured and organized.